That's very interesting research. I wonder why it is that students don't get taught how to take good notes. I feel like it's such a basic thing. We go through all these different classes from, I guess, high school all the way up to university level. How is it possible that students don't have the skill set to make good, effective notes? I mean, we must be able to make notes to learn new information. Or was that just me? Oh, you guys are there again. No, you thought you got me, but I knew it was recording the whole time. Are you guys ready? We're doing notes. Forget what you've learned before. No, wait, remember what you've learned before. Could be important. However, get ready to make room for a bit of a new approach to making notes. Now, you'll see up on the screen there is the SQ3R method of note-taking. Now, I'm sure you guys are all pretty well versed when it comes to this technique, or maybe you've never seen it before. What I would expect you to be really familiar with is the process of making notes. So I'm sure you're no strangers to notes itself. You would be able to appreciate just how important making notes is for your ability to do well in a certain subject. So launching right into it, SQ3R. Let's see if we can make sense of this technique and become slightly more effective in the way in which you make your notes in your classes or in your lectures. So launching right into it. So SQ3R, what does it stand for? Very simply, we have survey, question, read, recite, and review. Now, what are each of these components? What are you supposed to do? Why is it important or even relevant when it comes to making notes? Well, think about the previous video. We went through memory. We had those 3 stages. We had the ability to encode information. We had the ability to store information and then to retrieve that particular information. Now, all of that requires a very neat package, or put simply, notes. Yeah, we mentioned notes in the last one as well. And from a fundamental perspective of learning, if your notes aren't organized, if you don't reflect and think and incorporate multiple different aspects into your notes probably aren't going to help you to get them a sort of the best possible grade. So let's see if we can run through this with a little bit of a fine comb and truly understand what this technique requires you to do. So first thing is survey, which means you're presented with information and you should go through and scan the resource. Now, it sounds pretty familiar, but what are you meant to scan and how are you meant to scan the resource? What are we looking for when it says scan resource? So, really want you to think about certain things before you start reading it, right? Our gut instinct is to read through the information, but before you do that, you should go through the headings. Okay, there are certain key features you should reflect on. So, first one there would be headings. You want to scan through the headings to see what topics are being covered. Figures or diagrams or pictures, right? They're always great. They do give you a good indication of what is going to be covered within this volume of reading. Another really important one is the index itself. Now, the index is incredibly helpful because it'll help you to understand the structure of the information. I cannot emphasize enough just how important the structure of your information is for your memory to be able to encode effectively what you're learning. And another suggestion there would be any charts or tables. Really important. Have a look at them, see if you can understand them before you read the information. Now, you're probably wondering, why would that be important? Well, here's the punchline, and I'm going to call this goal. All right, I mentioned this in the last video as well. Goals are really important whenever you look at information. If your mind doesn't have something to connect it to, you're not going to be able to store the information effectively. So that gives us this set of rules for when we see new information. And the first one is read with purpose. So, sounds straightforward, but that really means you need to think about why you're going to read the information that you're going to scan through. If you have a purpose, if you have a mission, your mind is going to be able to retrieve a lot more information. So keep that in mind. Next one, question. What are we questioning? Why are questions important? Well, question is all about formulating your own question. So why would you want to formulate questions, and how is that relevant? Again, using a goal, we can think of a reason. So one good goal that you could set when it comes to questions is a principle called active reading. Now, for those who are not familiar, active reading is really just a process of carefully assessing the why behind what you're reading. And as you go through, you want to be able to challenge yourself and really question any content that maybe you are not familiar with. And really useful if you do that before you launch into your reading as well, because then you're able to really think about, well, what am I going to need to understand this information? I have some idea of what it's about. Maybe I want to do a little bit more reading on this later. Maybe I need to look at this concept before I start, right? Really test yourself, see if there's anything you need to do before you launch in to actually read the information for the first time. That takes us to your first read. This is your first proper read. Deep reading is the first thing we need to do. So, purposeful reading. Now, what is purposeful reading, you ask? Well, purposeful reading has a few very important characteristics that I need you to consider. The first one, and probably the most important, is deep reading. So in order to be able to do deep reading, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. So deep reading is all about basically critically analyzing information, drawing good connections, checking to see the logic behind what you're reading, and I think if you retain a goal as you're working through it, you'll do really, really well with deep reading. The second point, hopefully I don't end up obscuring it myself, note-taking. Sounds like a fairly obvious one, especially talking about a note-taking technique. Note-taking itself would be literally you working through a document, and maybe on one side or sitting next to you, or if you're on a device, maybe in another window, you have your ability to make little cryptic notes. Now these are incredibly useful. I do this myself all the time. You can have a document open. Within that document, you can sort of record key things that come up that maybe you find important during your day, kind of like a journal, if you will. I guess you could also call it like a logbook. You're basically tracking certain things that are important, and you want to do this in your writing as well, because although your memory is incredible, you probably remember everything. The number one problem with not having this ability to sort of take notes during your reading is that you will forget key information, and it's kind of there, it's stored at a very sort of faint level, but if you don't have a cue to retrieve that memory, you're not going to recall that detail. So very useful. Make a little cue for yourself, put a little note down, helps your brain to sort of get warmed up and really remember those information. And that takes us on to the last point there, which is the summary itself. Now, summary is, again, something we all understand incredibly well. You must summarize your content. We're taught this from a very early stage in learning. And the key thing with summary is, again, you want to look at the information carefully, break it down into individual components so that you are able to provide a very clear summary of the information with keywords sort of featuring heavily. Now, as with the previous ones, you should set a goal. What is your goal for your first purposeful reading? Well, one element that I would suggest, which is probably the most important for any type of reading, would be understanding. So what is understanding, and why would understanding be important when it comes to something as simple as making notes and reading something? If you don't challenge yourself to be able to understand the information as you're working through it, you're not going to be able to truly appreciate its importance. And that really ties back to your initial goal as well. If you have a clear purpose, you're going to be able to work through the information with very, very analytical mindset, and hopefully you'll be able to retain a lot of that information. Now the next one, we jump into recite. So recite is quite literally, as it specifies, you need to consider the information and reproduce the information. Now, what's the best way to reproduce information? Well, I would argue it's going to be verbal and written summaries of information. So it might sound a bit strange, and obviously verbal you can't always sort of effectively enact, especially if you're sitting in a library. A little bit awkward when everyone starts staring at you because you're reciting your notes. So don't do that. Maybe you should do that. Let me know in the comments. So verbal and written. So absolutely you should be making written notes. And that means looking at what you've recorded about some sort of data or article or notes that you've been provided maybe by your teacher or your lecturers. Once you've got that information, you want to find connections between all of it. Looking for keywords, looking for related ideas. You can go back to your index, think about the structure of the information and find patterns between all of it. Really important. So having the verbal information or the written practice of the information is quite powerful. The key thing with this is, again, you're going to create order. They're really important to be able to create order when you're working through content in order to truly make sure you understand it well. And similar as before, going for a goal. What is the goal when it comes down to doing sort of verbal reciting or written reciting of information? A very straightforward but critical goal will be memory retrieval. So memory retrieval is quite important. It's very underrated. Now you might be thinking, okay, memory retrieval, you're making notes, you're reciting your notes. How are you meant to do that? What is a good strategy? Well, active recall. You remember that one from our first video and briefly in the second video as well. These techniques help us and challenge us to be able to recall certain information, and absolutely critical to be able to bring out this information as you're making your notes. It's kind of like a rehearsal, practicing the information. Okay, that takes us on to the next one, which is review. And review is a really important component of the SQ3R because that's really where you're going to enhance your memory of the hard work you've put into analyzing certain information. So review, what is it all about? Well, the core of it is in fact repetition, not repetition. Here we go. So repetition, super important, and I think we'll launch into the goal straight away for this one. What is your goal with repetition? Why do we repeat going through our notes? Why do we repeat doing anything that we want to learn? Well, one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of them is integration. So integration would require you to consider a whole heap of information and draw connections. We can do that with what we've got so far. If we go through each of these different components, there are certain ways in which we can withdraw or extract key bits of information. For each of these so far, we've gone in with a bit of a strategy, haven't we? Each one has a goal. So the goal is important because that helps your mind to form very key connections between each of these. So we'll add the goal in here as well. Okay, these goals help you center your mind when it comes to these techniques. Now remember, SQ3R, there were 5 goals. 5 goals were purpose. Second one was active reading. So actually challenge yourself while you're going through the information, really reflect on it. Then you want to do understanding, so make sure you understand the information and truly appreciate what it means. If you're not sure on a certain concept, or if there's a term that you've never seen before or a word that's unfamiliar, check it. Pause your process, do a quick search, don't get sidetracked, spend only a few seconds on it, very quickly get the definition, make sure you're clear on what it means. And for the next part there, memory retrieval, really important as well. And then for integration, being able to look at multiple data sets and integrating the information. Now there's a bit more of repetition, so we'll work through maybe 3 different elements that we should consider. one of which is retention. Now, retention requires you to truly understand the information. Otherwise, your synapses tend to not retain the information. So very important, if you have purpose, you have a clear understanding, you'll be more likely to retain the information of interest. Now, another one that I think is absolutely critical is link. You must form links. Again, think about the structure of the synapse. Synapses can branch off, there's plasticity, it's able to form different connections. The more connections you form, or the more synapses you get on a related topic, the stronger the overall signal for that particular memory. So if you can bump up the signal strength, sort of talking at a neuronal level, you're able to enhance your memory. You're able to tell your mind or your neurons that this concept is important, I need to retain it, and therefore drawing multiple links to different parts will help you to retain the information. And the last one, probably the least effective, but that's what we have to do sometimes, is reread. Okay, so between all of these, really useful method for being able to challenge yourself to actually remember different types of information. But as it stands there, I guess it's not really that interesting. It's looking kind of bland, isn't it? So one other thing that you could do when it comes to your notes, very important, color. You want to be able to spruce things up a little bit. So let's see if we can manage to do it on our diagram that we have right now. So we had our first topic, and I would suggest as you're doing this, try and use different colors, because that really helps you to sort of keep track, but also it helps your mind to picture things. So remember in the first video we talked about the mind map in particular, and the mind map is again a really effective way of being able to utilize this particular skill set. So absolutely keep that in mind. You want to try and bring in color, because color is able to really enhance your notes. So already we've just changed one of them. Oh, -1 digit there. It's okay, we'll give it a quick spruce of color. So just by changing the colors, we can really enhance this information already. So keep that in mind. You want to use different colors to be able to truly push your mind's ability to retain different information. Now, while we're here, we need to do some recall ourselves, don't we? We've gone through this technique once. We have a pretty good idea now of what's going on. And the next part would be revision. So we worked our way through. We have the SQ3R method. It is for note-taking. We need to survey the information, which requires you to scan different resources, things like the headings and the index. They might not seem so interesting. Well, actually they are. They're the most important part of any source of information. Things like the abstract or the summaries, those are where you want to start, so you can get an idea of where that content is taking you. And revising our goal, you should read with purpose. Jumping on to the next one, formulate a very purposeful goal as you work through. And I think we're meant to have formulate question there. Is that dropped off, or is it just me? It's alright. We'll update our notes. That's the whole process of how notes work. So very important, formulate questions, because as you're formulating questions, when you're assessing the information, you're able to do a really good job at utilizing the information. So we'll give that one a spruce of color as well. Third one, read. You must be able to then proceed into reading the information. You have to read it in a lot of depth. You need to be able to make very clear notes as you're working through, and absolutely make sure you're challenging yourself with understanding. Okay, understanding is sort of the foundation of being able to make good notes. Once you've done that, you want to be able to recite the information. And what does recite look like? Well, essentially recite is all about being able to take the information and process the information in a slightly different way. So you want to be able to make notes, summarize your previous notes, and basically improve on what you've done before. So basic illustration there, SQ3R. You can challenge yourself, take any particular subject. Maybe there's something that you need to make notes on for a test coming up, or just to try and keep up with your notes in class. Take this technique, challenge yourself, try and find a way to recall each of these components, right? SQ3R. You sort of want to try and test yourself out. Maybe use something like a mnemonic or acronym, so you can try and write out these terms, memorize what they mean. We had survey, we had question, read, recite, and review. You need to remember those. Kind of like you need to look at the index if you're reading. If you have each of those components, you'll be able to withdraw out from that everything that you need to be able to make effective notes every time. Once you've done it a few times, it becomes a habit. And oh, is that Black Friday sales? Oh, sorry, I've got to go. I hate to just leave you like this, but good luck with that method. Test it out. I need to go get in on one of these sales. I'll catch you guys later.